moment to introduce everyone. We have Marie Lailer, who is part of our Whitman Historical Commission. And Marie is hosting a Whitman History Chat that will be on Zoom, as well as the conference call if you want to use the conference call through the Whitman Senior Center, and join in and learn lots of fun and exciting stuff from Marie.
Sounds good to me. Well, Wayne and I were just talking a little bit. Last week, we had a little bit of a discussion about a gravestone up in the Pine Street Cemetery. And it's an unusual gravestone. It says Fluffy, F-L-U-F-F-I. And I was thinking that Fluffy maybe was a cat. So I happened to put it out there on the Whitman Pride section of Facebook, and someone answered back that it was his mom's cousin, and that it wasn't a cat, it was a lamb. And she had a very sad story to go with it. She had gone to Maine for vacation back in 1975. She was strangled, murdered by someone who turned out to be a serial killer. And she was brought back here and buried. And the headstone is a lamb, and it's missing its head. So I'm working with the DPW right now to see if we can get a little more information about some of the other graves up there. Who maintains them, what we would need to do to maybe restore that particular site. There was another gravestone that was maybe broken into 6 pieces and stacked one on top of another. So I'm curious to see who that was and maybe see what it takes to actually restore some of them. Wayne, you were saying you walked up through there the other day and you recognized a lot of names.
Yes, I did, yeah. There was Bud Talpies, and there was Parker Bates, and I don't know, I don't remember them all now, but there was quite a few names that I recognized. And I found the gravestone for an uncle that's there, and my great-grandmother's headstone. And the uncle was from a family from New Hampshire named Gooch. And I found their headstone before, but I didn't really look for it this time. But he has a sister, I think, that's buried under that name there, her maiden name.
That's an unusual name. Is it German?
I have no idea. He died in 1955.
Okay.
So in those days, I wasn't really that interested in cemeteries and headstones and all. But I remember him because for a year or two, he and his family lived with my family. They had moved up here from Rhode Island, and until they got settled, they were temporarily living with us.
Oh, okay.
And at the time, my family lived in Brockton for a few years in those days. So.
Yeah.
But,
when you mentioned Bud Talpy, I immediately thought of the Baptist church that was in front, right on Washington and South.
Yeah.
It is now condominiums. But when they were breaking down their belongings, one of the things was the peace pole that was out in front of the Baptist church. So that was graciously donated to the Whitman Historical Commission. And we had it in our office for quite a while. And the Congregational Church asked if they could borrow it. So we got the selectmen's permission to do that. So it is now up in a small garden in front of the Congregational Church that is dedicated to, trying to come up with her name, Mrs. Ritter. I don't remember her first name, June or Jane. And she had always admired that peace pole. So it was a wonderful place. But going back to Bud Talpy, Bud was the person who carved the peace dove at the top of it. The peace dove is now missing, so I'm going to call the Congregational Church. I know they have a new minister, but I'm curious to see what happened to the peace dove and whether maybe they had tried to have it redesigned by Bud Talby or what. So we'll see. I'll do a little more research on that and get back to everybody on it.
Also, last time we were talking about a whipping post that was in Whitman. Were you able to find out anything about that?
I was. I actually was talking with Don Barley, and we were talking about the time period of it. And at that time, we were South Abington. So we're suspecting that it may have not been right here in town, that it may have been located up in Abington, which would make a little more sense.
Yeah.
So I do have a meeting up there at the Dyer this afternoon, so I'm going to hopefully do a little bit of research and see if I can find anything more about that.
Okay.
But the suspicion is it was up in Abington Center rather than Whitman Center.
Well, that sounds great, because Whitman wouldn't have anything bad like that in its center.
No, not at all. Except for that one slave that we were talking about that was quite mischievous.
Right, yeah. Is Gil joining us today?
I don't think so.
Uh-huh.
I don't think so. I was looking through some of the history books today. Do you remember any of the parades or the groups that we talked minstrel shows a couple of years ago? I know the KFC used to put one on. I think the Congregational Church did.
Well, they had minstrel shows in the town hall when we were young. In fact, we had one of the priests at the Holy Ghost Church that performed in a couple of those.
Oh, really?
And that was in the days when they still had the men imitating some of the black people, with the faces and all. I don't think he did that, but he did sing a couple of songs or something. And he was a younger fellow at the time. And but I remember as a young person, we would go to those performances, and they were always sold out. Everybody used to love them.
Everybody used to go, yeah.
And then, of course,
it was great productions.
They used to have a policeman's ball every year.
And a fireman's ball, from what I hear.
Now everybody's all just old fuddy-duddies. They never do anything like that anymore. Of course, you can't right now anyway.
Exactly, but wouldn't it be fun to spend a night all dressed up?
Yeah, they used to use the town hall for all that, because the high school, the gym wasn't big enough for things like that.
Right. But the town hall, actually, that hall itself is absolutely beautiful.
Right.
The surround around the stage was redone a couple of years ago.
Well, the high school had its graduations there.
Oh, really?
In those days, the classes were just a little over 100 people. And the year we graduated was 57. And of course, everybody was up on the stage, all the students sitting in the bleachers that they put up. And they had everything going on there then. But they used to use the town hall for a lot of things. And I guess, the older people that used to do all that have all died off now, and the younger people are too busy raising their families, and they don't have time for a lot of that stuff now.
A lot of from what I can see, a lot of the companies here in town, the shoe companies, the box companies, had great big picnics. They had bands, they had singing groups. So they not only were work friends, but they were friends outside of work.
Right, and in those days, of course, a lot of the festivities were put on by the churches, and we used to have a lot more churches in town too. Today we've only got about 3, 4, 5, something like that. You've got the one down at on South Ave on the other side of Franklin Street. I think that's the Methodist church.
Methodist.
You got the Congos, you got the Holy Ghost, and then there's one on the corner of West Street and
Park.
Gold Street or Silver Street, something like that. If you go down West Street, headed towards where the laundromat is.
Yes, yeah, that's a four-square church, I think.
Yeah, that used to be the Unitarian, I think, at one time.
Possibly. And then there's the one over by the park.
Right, yeah, that's the, I can't remember the name of it now, but that's a very active church too.
Yes.
And down on the corner of Marble Street, you know, where the
yes,
all the condos are, that first building on the left was a church at one time too.
Yes, it was. And when they put in the condominiums, they left some of the stained glass windows in it. So a couple of the apartments that face out onto South Ave still have the original stained glass.
Well, when they redid that whole factory complex, because of its historical value, everything exteriorly had to be exactly the way the original building was, the same style of windows, the same size, the doors, all the outside, I don't know, shingles or whatever it is. Everything had to be exactly the same because it's a historical landmark.
It did, and it is a nationally registered historical landmark.
Yeah.
The other big one here in town is our park.
Right, yes, yeah.
And that has some great history alone.
Yeah. I had relatives, older relatives that when I was a kid that worked at both places. My wife did too. Her father worked at the Commonwealth, and I think her mother worked at the Regal.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a my great grandmother that's buried in the Pine Street Cemetery. I think she worked at the Regal too. Well, everything was shoes in those days, you know.
Shoes and boxes and shoe parts.
At one time, I think it's a fact, the city of Brockton manufactured more shoes than any one country in the world did. That's how much. I mean, every corner had a shoe factory on it.
Yeah. I was looking at some old pictures. I lived down on Auburn Street, and I was looking at old pictures of Auburnville, which I was aware existed, but didn't realize that there were big factories and it was like its whole little community down there.
Yeah.
So I want to read up and learn a little bit more about that. Someday when I can get back into the Historical Commission office in the town hall, there's got to be something in there about it.
Yeah, well, that's like down the west end of town. Of course, in those days, when we were in school, if you lived on the east side of the railroad tracks, where Franklin Street, that section was considered the poor section of town.
Oh, really?
And the rest of Whitman and the west side was considered the affluent section. And if you went up Whiting Ave, which is the last street before you reach McLaughlin Chevrolet on the right side. At the end of that street, on the right-hand corner, that is now a home, but that was the West Side Association was there, and it was very, very active socially.
Social club?
Yeah, it was made up of members of people who lived up the west side of town. And they used to have all kinds of functions and this and that. And I guess they had quite a big following. And that I think Dennis Regan was the one that bought it when it finally stopped operating. And Dennis lived there for years.
Oh, okay.
Well,
somebody had asked me about looking into their house on Temple Street. So I was doing a little bit of research. The assessor's office talks about it being built in 1900. And through my connections with the state, they were very clear to me that the assessor's records do not always reflect the correct date of the house.
Well, mine's not accurate either.
Yeah. So
when I bought my house, I hired a page down at the registry in Plymouth to search my land and take it back as far as they could.
Yeah.
And, the land where my house is, they were only able to take it back as around 1806. And
That's still not pretty bad.
I have a record of everybody that owned my property up until the present time and how much they paid for it and who they sold it to and all.
Yeah.
My house was built in 1952.
Okay.
Because my street was a two-street development, and the town has my house being built in 1950.
Yeah.
I can never get them to change the record for it. But it's fascinating when you get into some of these streets.
This particular house, it's down close to the 800, 900s off Temple Street.
Well, that's down near McLaughlin Chevrolet.
Down near McLaughlin.
Yeah.
And it looks like it was going to be right in the area of Old Mansion Lane.
Well, that's even further down.
Yeah. And it was supposed to be called Hillside Terrace.
Well, there's a street up there called Hilltop Road now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was on the other side of the road, like the side of McLaughlin and Old Mansion Lane. This was supposed to be, it was proposed, I think, in 1911. This lady's house, they said, was 1900. The deeds that I could chase back did say there was a house on the property, but many of them do say, and all buildings wherein. So it leaves it open to interpretation of whether there was actually a house there or not.
You don't know exactly which house it was?
I do. I just didn't want to broadcast it.
Oh, okay.
But so I'm thinking that the house was actually built in 1923. When I can find the original, that is how far back I can trace it, that there was a single owner of that small bit of property. But there was supposed to be a huge development up through there.
Well, they have 4 or 5 streets up there off of Old Mansion Lane now.
Yeah, no, this was totally separate. This was totally a separate, it was called Hillside Terrace. Trefont was involved in it, and I'm trying to remember who the surveyor was.
And this is on the right side of the street headed towards Brockton.
Yes.
Well, most of that land from like Old Mansion Lane all the way up almost to before you get to Hancock Street.
Mm-hmm.
All of those side streets there have paper streets going down between a lot of the houses that were never developed.
Yeah.
But they're still there in the same way on the other side of Temple Street. There's a lot of paper streets that have never been developed, like even my street, that wasn't developed until 52. But there's 1 or 2 paper streets that go up towards Joyce Terrace behind where my house is.
Explain to people what paper streets are.
Well, it's a street that was laid out back whenever the town laid out the plan, but it was just never developed.
It was never developed.
And
exactly.
People that own houses on it, if their house borders the paper street, they have the right to use to the middle of the street, unless it's developed.
Right.
Then they do it. But so if there's a house on both sides of the paper street, each person has the right to use half of that as their own. But
Yeah.
at any time, somebody could, buy the land and develop it if they wanted to.
Yeah, I guess.
But of course, so much of it couldn't be developed because until we got sewers, nothing would perk.
Nothing would perk,
And
exactly.
the whole town was a swamp. It still is, like all the end of my street. It's Boy Scout, or was Boy Scout land that was donated to the town. But so that's why so much of the land is now being developed, because they don't have to perk where we have town sewers.
They were talking in Colonel Hobart's book about him needing a plow with 12 to 14 oxen to plow the land. He said there was plenty of peat. He said the large rocks you wouldn't believe, and that it really wasn't great land for agriculture.
Yeah.
As
I know my father's house, just around the time my wife and I got married, his house only had a small cellar in it. You had to stoop to go in the cellar. And after my wife and I got married, I still had a year to go in the service, so we went back to Carolina where I was stationed. And during that year, her father and her brother dug out the whole cellar and made it a regular full size,
yeah.
and they had some giant rocks in the cellar, and the only way they could do anything was to dig big giant holes and bury the rocks in it, because they were too big to break up. And of course they couldn't move them because the house was built on top of them.
It was on top of them, yeah.
So they had to dig giant holes, and then they were able to roll the rocks into it. And today you would never know that, but they're buried under the concrete floors.
That was very industrious.
Yeah, well, you know, that's the way they did it in those days.
The old New Englanders.
Yeah. I'm
always surprised as I do the readings, and I do readings up at the Dyer, and I start doing some of the genealogy. Have you ever heard of the Cyrus Nash papers?
I've never read them, no.
All right, so Cyrus Nash was a builder, and he took a fall from a roof at a very, very young age, maybe late 20s. And he was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. So periodically, friends of his would load him up on a buggy and take him through the town. And he would make notes of what house was where, who he had been told had died there, who had lived there. And then he would many times remark that the house that sat on this property used to sit on another property. Because when they sold property back then, it didn't necessarily go with the house. They could sell the house, they could sell the barn, they could sell the outhouse, and anything else totally separately. And the people would come, old New Englanders would come, dismantle it, and take it to their property and put it back up again. Mm-hmm. So it's some fascinating reading. And Cyrus Nash being a builder, and it turns out that he wrote, people gave him these little tiny notebooks. They were about 4 by 6. So his notes are very well documented. But sometimes when paper was scarce, he'd write it on the back of wallpaper. So the Dyer Memorial has all of that in its archives. And when I'm looking up the history of houses or the history of a particular area of land, I go through that paperwork and look at it. And he's absolutely amazing. It got to the point that he would have people coming to him and telling him the history of what was going on in the town, because he didn't have the opportunity to get out and see it himself. So there's some great stories that he has. So the papers there, the Cyrus Nash papers exist up at the Dyer Memorial, as do the Gurney Sisters. Now, the Gurney Sisters were 2 young ladies from Whitman who were very prolific, and they did a lot of historical research into genealogy. So a lot of the paperwork that they've established through the years is up there. Have you ever heard of Martha Campbell?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so Martha Campbell was a historian. I think she lived in Abington. And she did an amazing job. She was a very prolific writer. We have many, many copies of her articles that were written from the Enterprise and the Rockland Standard and they're sequential, and they talk about what was going on in the town at the time. And she has just a huge collection up at the Dyer Memorial that, again, is a great research area. So hopefully once the library is open again and we can start to move around a little bit, maybe once we all get our COVID vaccines, we will start to be able to get back into these archives and do the looking and reading and things that we need to do to find out the histories.
Yeah. Speaking of houses that were moved, I can remember years and years ago when the Forest Street School was still fairly young.
Yeah.
They moved a house, and I can't remember where they moved it from, but they moved it, and it sits directly across the street on Forest Ave from the school. It's an older, when you look at it, you can tell it's an older home.
Yeah.
But they moved the house whole the way it was. I can't remember if they used a wagon with horses or if they had some kind of a flatbed truck.
Yeah.
But I remember they had to move some of the telephone pole wires or electric wires that ran across the High Street.
Mm.
I think it came from somewhere on High Street, but I don't remember where. And of course, up on High Street, where old South Ave is, that's where the old turkey farm used to be.
Oh, I didn't realize there was a turkey farm up there.
Yeah, even after I was married, my in-laws used to buy their turkeys there for Christmas and Thanksgiving all the time.
Ooh.
It was very, very, very well known in town. It was, they raised the turkeys there. It was a regular turkey farm. And then the property got sold, and now it's all been developed.
It's developed,
yeah. Down where Mayflower Circle is, and some of those streets there.
Yep, up off of Old High Street.
Yeah. Of course, Bud Talby just lived down the street from there.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he was a High Street resident.
Yeah. He was also the building inspector. So
he was.
Back in the
Late 70s, early 80s.
Late 70s, early 80s, yeah.
Yep.
Because he was the building inspector when I put in an above ground pool in my backyard, and he had to come down and inspect it.
Well, as I said, Bud was also a carver of birds. And I would love to be able to see his collection at some point.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of his family still has it or not.
Yeah, he used to carve a lot of things, yeah.
Yeah, he was a very interesting man.
Yeah.
He knew a lot about a lot of things.
Yeah.
But the churches have been fascinating. One of the other historical members was telling me about the Methodist Church windows, that they are done by a very famous stained glass window designer.
Yeah.
I didn't realize until a few years ago, I was doing a little bit of research and I got into the Archdiocese of Boston. But they actually have a warehouse that they keep stained glass windows in. So if you were to build a new church, you could go to them and say, I need a couple of windows. And they would let you peruse their catalog and you could buy their windows from them.
Well, that's good, yeah. But one of these churches has some fascinating records, because I know back in the 70s, early 70s, I was trying to do my genealogy, and that was in the days before most people had computers.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to go to the actual churches all around the South Shore area and this and that. And it took me a long time, and then I met, Ronnie Poole. He and his wife worked for the Enterprise. Mm-hmm. As reporters, and he was a photographer, and his wife was very vocal at town meetings. She didn't hesitate to speak her mind. But he had right, he had a barn out back. It was an old dilapidated building, and it was full of all these records. And through him, I was able to trace my ancestry directly back to 11 different passengers of the Mayflower.
Oh, cool.
On my mother's side of the family.
Yeah.
I was able to trace my ancestry back to 11 of the actual passengers on the Mayflower. And my wife's brother, one of his daughters, traced theirs back because they were Howlands, and it was a Howland on the, and she just joined the Mayflower Society last year. And I guess it's quite expensive to join it, and you have to be able to actually have documentation and prove every step of the way.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you can't just use word of mouth. You have to be able to document everything. But some of these churches in Whitman and Hanson and Pembroke, Abington especially, it's fascinating what they have for records.
We have just inherited at the Dyer Memorial the church up on Bedford Street, just beyond the Knights of Columbus, just over the line into Abington.
Yeah, that's the same type of church that we have on Park Ave.
Okay, All Saints, maybe? Is that the name of it?
No, well, that's the one on Park Street, I think, is All Saints.
Okay.
And I can't remember the name. I know the one you mean because it's right after the KFC. Yeah.
Right after the KFC on the same side.
Well, it's the same denomination, Episcopal.
Okay, so they have just dissolved their parish.
Oh, they have?
They did, yeah. So they are selling the property.
Are they merging with the one on Park Ave?
Not as far as I know. I'm sure some of their members may join the other parish, but they were dissolving their partnership, and that's St. Luke's Lutheran, Joy of Christ, St. Luke's Lutheran. And
Lutheran. I thought
they were kind enough to donate to the Dyer Memorial all of their past records, their Bible from the pulpit, their original charter. The pastor that was breaking up the church was very, very generous and very kind to be able to know that he was bringing that to us and that it would be preserved and saved for people to see.
Yeah, well, the trouble is so many people have stopped going to church now that the membership gets so low that they can't support the church,
Do you think that overall people just aren't joiners anymore?
Well, and I'm not even talking about this COVID thing. I think people in the last 50 years have just gotten so busy, and because of the cost of living, both partners, married couples, however you want to call them, both the husband and wife have to work pretty much full time.
Agreed.
And then in the evenings, they spend taking care of their kids and going to things for their kids. They don't have time to join or donate finances to the churches because everything is so expensive now.
Exactly.
Whereas years ago, like even when we were growing up, everything was still pretty much farmland, and you didn't do things except through your church. Today, there's all kinds of entertainment, and with computers, forget it. That's all the kids do is spend.
I know. It's
educating their thumbs on the smartphones they have today.
It's very, very difficult to get the kids away from their computers, and to think that we have paper records of a lot of this. We have just amazing amount of history that has never been downloaded.
Well, it's expensive to do that too.
It is. Prior to the COVID, the Dyer Memorial was working with a company called Digital Commonwealth. And Digital Commonwealth had agreed with a lot of the different libraries to take paperwork and download it and put it up on a website that was accessible. So at the Dyer, we have quite a bit. It's all ready. It's been submitted, but they haven't done anything since COVID came in. So we're sort of at a dead stop there.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that was through a state grant or what it was. The Dyer Memorial has just spent some money and taken some of the older maps that they had and turned them into good size reproductions so that they will be more visible and more able to be handled. Because a lot of them, the paper is just shredding.
And every time you handle it, it just deteriorates more.
It deteriorates more, exactly. So they've had reproductions made. But it's always been fascinating. I've always wanted to get it into digital formats. But it can be very expensive. It can be very, it's a lot of work. And it really needs professionals to be able to know how to interconnect all of the pieces of information and make them available on a website. So that was something that I was looking forward to trying to start. I know June O'Leary is working to get, there used to be a shelter down at the park, like a little pavilion that you could have picnics under.
I don't remember.
I don't know. It may go back into the 1930s, which would certainly be.
I don't remember one ever being there when we were in high school, which was just down where the police station is.
Yeah.
And we used to walk up, to the center of town every day.
Yeah.
It could have been there, but, being a teenager at the time, I probably wouldn't have paid much attention to it anyway.
Yeah.
The only thing I remember is the existing bandstand.
Yeah.
And the Little League field wasn't there. None of the playing fields were there.
None of the playing fields were there. We talked at one point about the statue that was donated by the family. I think it's got a cherub on the top. It was a water fountain originally.
Yeah, it faces Park Ave.
It faces Park Ave.
Right.
And that was donated by a lovely family. The wife had been very, very ill. And the husband had come out and asked the children to respectfully please play on the other side of the park so that the noise didn't bother his wife. So after his wife passed, he was nice enough to put up that water bubbler for the children. It does not, DPW has told me that they can't find the pipes at this point, but they are looking into possibly restoring some of that statue.
That sounds familiar. I think that bubbler might have been active when we were in school. And also the one on the opposite corner, the one across the street from the old police station.
The big black one?
Yeah, that was, well, it was a bubbler at one time, but I think it was also a trough for the horses to drink from too. Seems to me I remember that being available. I can't remember which that was at the time, but I remember the one facing Park Ave was working because we used to stop there to get a drink.
Yeah, my understanding is that those have, certainly they're not considered hygienic anymore.
Right.
But I know the one down on Park Ave, they cannot locate the water supplies to it. So that would be an issue. But the statue itself is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And there is a lovely plaque that is there.
Yeah. Before COVID, we used to walk the park 4 days a week. And we always went down park. We used to make a circuit of the park. We'd make 4 circuits.
And so you walked a mile. It's a quarter mile around the park.
No, we made 3 circuits, and that's if using my vehicle, 3 times around it exactly with just like a tenth of a mile under 2 miles.
Oh, okay.
But that was a long time I measured, so maybe my car speedometer didn't register right or something. But of course, now with the COVID, we don't go there because there's too many people and none of them are wearing masks, even though they're required to wear them.
Yeah.
That's why we go to the cemeteries, because we don't run into people.
Yeah, and they're very quiet walking paths.
Yeah. But, you know, and even at the cemeteries, a lot of times people don't wear masks, but we just walk away the other direction. We don't have any contact with them at all. In fact, I've started wearing double masks now.
Yeah, that's the new recommendation, is those N25s, N95 masks.
Yeah.
Or to double mask, so.
Well, I'd wear the regular mask and then I put a cloth mask over it with a filter that has a filter in it.
Yeah.
So you got to do whatever you can do, you know?
Exactly. We need to protect ourselves in this day and age.
Yeah.
Hopefully the COVID shots will be out there and available more readily to us shortly.
Well, I got a surprise because my wife and I were, you know, going to get the COVID shots when they were available because of our age. We'd be in the first section of the phase 2. But I got a surprise call from the VA Saturday, wanted to know if I was interested in getting the COVID shot. So this coming Friday, I'm going to get the first one.
Woohoo!
And then
That is wonderful.
On the 26th of February, I get the second one.
Excellent.
But my wife can't get them because she's not a veteran. You have to be a veteran.
Yeah.
And so now we've got to try to get her fixed up, you know. But that's going to be a mess trying to get that done because there's going to be thousands of people in this state trying to all do it at the same time.
It is, but I think they're starting to put a lot more workings in place to get that done.
Well, once they get it organized and going, you know, I think our age group will probably be able to get it all done during the month of February.
Yeah.
Maybe even not the whole month. It depends on how many sites they have. Like they got the stadium over at Foxborough open now, but I'm not going to go over there and fight hundreds and hundreds of people trying to get in there. I'll wait a little longer, you know, or we were going to, but so we're going to wait till there's someplace closer. They've got one down at there's a market in Middleborough. I think they're going to be giving it out, and Plymouth's got a place. They ought to volunteer the KFC in Whitman. That would be a good place to do it.
Yeah, I think Tim Greno mentioned that he was going to try to get the middle school. I don't know how that's working out at this point.
Yeah. Well, the thing is with the KFC, you wouldn't have to worry about the kids being in the way. Yeah.
Yep, that's true.
And you know, I know they would donate the use.
Oh, of course they would. And you could go in the front door and out the back.
That's right, yeah.
It would be a good program. But we'll have to see as it comes out, rolls out what we're available for.
Well, hopefully this time next month, a lot of us will have gotten a shot.
Yeah. And hopefully the numbers will be coming down. For me, I miss the opportunities to get into the libraries, to get into the historical office, to actually do the research.
I can't wait for everything to open up again.
There's only so much that you can do on the computer.
Well, I want to go into the senior center and give Mary a hard time.
Exactly.
I used to go into the selectman's office at least once a week. I mean, the town clerk's office at least once a week, every other week, and give her and Michael a hard time.
Exactly. And I think they look forward to that too.
Well, now I have to be nice to her. Because if I go on that work study program again, she's the one that does the interview and decides that you get a job or not.
Oh, yeah. So you'll have to be nice to Dawn.
Be nice to her now. I can't give her a hard time anymore. I told her that. I said, well, I won't be able to come down and even see you because you tell me you're not interested.
I don't think she'll hold it against you.
Well, I used to do that because, you know, it got me out of the house for a day or two a week, made my wife happy. She didn't have
Yeah,
me.
what did you do? Did you work in the town hall or?
No, she had me work, Barbara had me working in the senior center itself.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, just doing like minor janitorial stuff. You know, and I would, if people needed help getting their walkers or their canes from the basement, I would go get them for them. They
Yeah.
weren't allowed to get down there. Help them use them, you know, when they brought them back, I would put them away, stuff like that.
Well, when Barbara Garvey was the director down there, and Frank Lynham was the town administrator, he asked the Historical Commission if we would start the old tradition of the Boston Post cane.
Of the what?
Boston Post cane. All right, the Boston Post was a newspaper in Boston. And at one point, they bought canes for just walking canes for the 356 cities and towns in the Commonwealth. They distributed a cane to each community, and it was to be given to the oldest citizen in the town.
Mm-hmm.
When that person passed, they would pass it on to the next person in line. So Frank asked if we would reinstitute that, and we said, yes, that sounds like a wonderful thing. So the original post cane for the town of Whitman has long since disappeared. So we purchased a couple of them, and we had a plaque made to commemorate the people that had received the cane through the years. So I went down to Barbara Garvey and I handed it to her and I said, would you put this up on the wall so that everyone can see it? The first and only name on it at this point is Priscilla Kaskin. She lived on Gold Street, right across the street from June O'Leary.
Yeah.
And she lived to be about 105. And she was a very sharp lady right up till the end. She was the first recipient, so her name was on the plaque. And when somebody had asked where the plaque went, I went, well, I know I brought it down to the senior center. I assume they put it up. I have no idea. So when Mary Holland picked up Barbara's torch and carried it on, I said, would you keep an eye out for this? And sure enough, she found the plaque. So hopefully it will go up in the town hall, in the senior center. And once this COVID passes, we will start researching the cane again.
Yeah.
And that will be passed on to the oldest citizen in town.
Great. Well, the rate I'm going, maybe someday I'll get the cane.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
That would only be a few years from now.
Well, would that we all could live to 105. Priscilla Kaskin had a great life. She had a great family.
Yeah.
In fact, when the family gave it back to us to give to the next person, I received it from her great-great-granddaughter.
Mm.
So there were, and she was maybe 7 or 8. And at first she was very hesitant to give it to me. She said, that was Grandma's cane. And I explained why we were going to have it and that somebody else that was very special was going to be receiving it.
Mm.
And she said, oh, okay. And as long as she knew that her name, her great-great-grandmother's name was going to be on the plaque.
Yeah.
So.
Speaking of people that lived to a great age, my wife had an uncle. He's Swedish. He grew up in Brockton, you know, the Swedish section. And his mother, when she got to be about 85, the family all got together to have a big celebration because she was 85, and they figured, well, this was back in, I don't know, must have been the 80s, something like that. And so we had a big celebration for her because you figure, well, she's 85, you know, she's only got a few more years. So then they had another celebration at 90. It kept on going, and she lived to be 110.
Oh my gosh.
She only died about maybe 20 years ago.
Oh, isn't that funny? She fixed them, huh?
And the last 2 years, she went into a nursing home over in Rockland, just down the street from the Catholic Church there. And up until she was 108, every weekend, her son still had to take her to the hairdresser in Whitman to get her hair done.
Absolutely.
And she was still pretty much mentally competent until about the last year or so.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
110.
The stories they can tell.
Well, don't forget, a lot of Swedish people used to live to great ages like that. So, but he only made it to 90.
Seniors.
He always wanted to beat his mother's record, but he only made it to 90.
110. That's pretty impressive.
Uh,
Well, I think we're going to call it a day.
okay. Well,
I think the next one is scheduled. I know I got the senior bulletin this morning, and it's not scheduled 2 times. We're only scheduled once next month.
only once next month, huh?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know whether it was a typo or we can always find out from Mary.
Well, it's in the bulletin, right?
Yes,
Okay.
which came out today.
Because I have a little calendar. Well, and I've got one of those desks that has the top that slides down, and when you open it up, I got some little shelves, and I have a notation taped to one of those shelves with the dates on it, so I don't forget it. But it was nice meeting you in person.
It was very nice to have the ability to actually see everybody.
Are you going to try to continue to have it on Zoom all the time?
I hope so.
Well,
I hope so.
Well, hopefully we'll get some more people.
Introduce.
That would be nice.
Yeah,
That would be nice.
I'm
I
sure
think Mary was thinking that the telephone contact might be easier for some people,
Could be, yeah.
but certainly if we can possibly get it a Zoom combination
Yeah.
with the telephone, that would be awesome.
Well, I know some of the people I know, their computers don't have cameras on them because, like at the zoning board meeting, we have one fella that doesn't have it, so he has to borrow Don Valley's computer
Yeah.
because his computer doesn't have a camera on it. But I don't know about Gail. So I know she has a computer, but I don't know if it has a camera on it. But she may have had something to do. Usually she and my wife talk about once a week, once every 2 weeks.
Okay.
So, you know, we grew up with her. She was a year ahead of us in high school.
Oh, okay.
So
I think we're scheduled for the 23rd of February.
the 23rd, okay.
So I'll give you some homework, do some more research, come up with more stories.
Well, half the time my wife says I get them wrong because of my age when I tell them, but I try anyway.
We do. And I mean, I'm constantly reading the books. I'm constantly reading history. So I'm always finding out new and unusual things.
I love to go down to our library in the historical section and read the old town reports from back in the 20s and 30s.
Oh, they are wonderful, aren't they? And I hate to sound morbid, but I love reading the old obituaries.
I apologize for my grandfather clock, but I can't. I won't. By the time I get over there to turn it off, it'll be all done.
Not a problem.
So I'll close off and I'll see you next week.
I will see you soon.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Wayne. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the History Channel today. We will be having our next history chat I think it is February 23rd. If you're interested in joining us, give a call to the Whitman Senior Center, and they will be able to give you all of the information. They will give you either a telephone login, if that is the way you wish to communicate with us, or a Zoom information if you want to do it through Zoom on your computer. So until February 23rd at 11 o'clock, thank you for joining us. Have a nice day.